All right, that Vanderbilt win may have been the biggest win for South Carolina as a program under Shane Beamer. Let me explain. Locked On Gamecock starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I'm your host, Chris Marler. I hope everyone's having a fantastic Sunday, Victory Sunday. Big win yesterday, becoming the norm with South Carolina this season as they've won 3 in a row. But we will get into all of that here shortly. Before we do, want to say thank you to our listeners that make Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Remember, we are a free and available podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Hopefully you guys did some dabbling with them this weekend. They have an incredible opportunity right now. Remember, you can start the season with a big return of FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. So very good deal. Make sure you are checking out our friends at FanDuel. All right, let's get into the show. And listen, I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm not trying to embellish what happened yesterday. I'm not trying to have a clickbaity title, shockingly. But you could make the case that yesterday's win over Vanderbilt may have been the biggest win in the Shane Beamer era. And like, granted, the Clemson win in 2022 meant way more to every single fan in South Carolina. The Tennessee win, that obviously was huge. This year, the win you had against Kentucky, the win against Oklahoma, the A&M win, all of those, I understand there's a number, like in a ranking next to that name and a national brand and logo that's much more identifiable than Vandy. But hear me out here. Beating Vandy is something that, yeah, you're supposed to do. You've beaten them now 16 straight years in a row. But everyone thought that you were walking into a trap. Everyone did. I heard several of our listeners and fans on social media say, yeah, this would be the most Carolina thing to happen. You beat a top 10 team like a drum, and then the next week you go out there and lay an egg and you lose to Vanderbilt. It's not the fact that it didn't happen. It never came close. It was a slow start, but that game was never in doubt. And there were things that happened that South Carolina did in the second half. Like, keep talking about turning this corner and this, like, growing up in front of our eyes with Sellers and Beamer and Dowell Loggins, and as a program in general. And you saw it again on Saturday. And in specific things they did that not just good programs do, but elite programs do. It feels like, and hopefully this isn't just a couple weeks of good games and good wins, but it feels like Shane Beamer and the staff and the team have learned lessons, like valuable lessons from mistakes they made, I think, looking ahead, or the Ole Miss preparation, the way they couldn't put away LSU. They have corrected all of those mistakes. I'm telling you right now, I will be dramatic about this. South Carolina is now ranked, I think they're 23rd in the Let Say People. There's not a lot of teams in the country that want to play South Carolina right now. Like, anyone. They've won 3 games in a row. You see what they've done to teams on the road. And going back to the Vandy thing, this was not the Vandy teams of old. This is not 2-10 Vandy that, like, they just, you wake up and all of a sudden you're in Nashville and you got to figure out how to escape with a win at an 11 a.m. kick. It's been one of the biggest Cinderella stories in the entire country. I will tell you that the moment I saw that Diego Pavia sued the NCAA on Friday before the game, I was like, this one's over. The line went up to like 6.5 points. And that part was also interesting because it was like, you've seen this, Vegas is starting to catch on. And it happened against Oklahoma, it happened against A&M, and now it happened against Vanderbilt, and with good reason, because the correct team ended up being favored by a lot. Now, getting to the game itself, listen, Vanderbilt is not – I think they're a good football team. I have said this over and over. That win they had against Bama was not a fluke. I don't know how they lost to Georgia State, but they do enough things, and they do it well enough to be a really above-average team. like ball control, not turning the ball over. They run the option well. They just do stuff that frustrates you and frustrates you and frustrates you. South Carolina didn't put up with any of that. I've watched Vandy play a couple times this year, and it's just this nuisance of an option where this I call him Husky Johnny Manziel is somehow eluding defenders, and what should be a 3-yard loss ends up being an 8-yard gain, and they just keep the chains with it and keep the chains with it. And then all of a sudden you look up and there's 5 minutes left in the quarter, and it's like we haven't even had the ball. That was never on the table for a second. Like never on the table for a second. And one of the things that South Carolina has continued to do, and they did on Saturday, was they took your spirit from jump. They didn't put enough points on the board in the first half, in my opinion, but they sent a message early on that like this was not going to be the typical success. You think you're going to line up and just rip off like 8 yards a carry or whatever, like you did against Texas, like you did against Bama. Not the case. This is an actual elite defense. Dylan Stewart continues to look like a fifth-year senior, and that entire defensive line is – I understand how good Ole Miss is. You can make the case this is easily the best one in the country. But going back to the game itself, you're talking about a Vanderbilt team that they were 6-0 against the spread as an underdog. They were like 5-1 outright in those games. Like they have been the Cinderella story for the entire country. And Diego Pavia is the head of that. You held them to their lowest yardage. You held them to their fewest first downs. You held them to, I think it was like under 300 yards total. And all the while, you did it from jump. And I keep saying this over and over again. When you put your foot on someone's throat, you do not let up. And that's the scary thing that South Carolina is starting to do the last 2 weeks that I feel like could be a sign that this program is about to skyrocket. And I don't want to get too ahead of my skis on that because it's still a very tough like road ahead. You're probably not going to get to play this year. You're also sitting in a situation in the SEC where the schedule is never going to be easy by any means. You did get a lot of home games this year. Year to year, it's always different. But here's the thing. A&M, I think we all puckered up a little bit when they caught up. I think it was like South Carolina has the lead obviously early on. They score first and score multiple times. And then you look up and it's 20-17 A&M. We've seen that movie before. They scored 27 unanswered points and tore down the goal. Well, they didn't tear the goalpost down, but tore down the bushes. But I mean, in the hedges and rushed the field. And then a week later, you go to Vandy. And it was like such a consensusly popular pick to pick Vandy in that because it was a letdown spot. And Beamer brought it up again. It was a letdown spot. Listen, that's a guy that national media and myself included before taking this job thought was like immature, too invested and involved in what media is saying. And that guy he knows every single thing that's happening in his program, and he knows exactly how to motivate his players, when to kick him in the ass, when to put his arm around him, all that. He has done a masterful job this season. And for the most part, it's been like the anti-Billy Napier thing. It's like he's had to hear constant criticism, and all he's done is prove everyone wrong. But going into that game against Vandy, everyone knew it was a letdown spot against a really good and frustratingly good team. Guys, remember I brought it up against Texas. That game against Texas, they had 3 turnovers, which was one more than they had all year. And they still only lost by 3 points. It's not that you beat Vandy. It's that you beat Vandy worse than any other team has beaten Vandy this season. And a couple years ago, that would have sounded dumb and meaningless and whatever. This year, in a year where they lost to Texas by 3, when they beat Bama, when they beat Virginia Tech as a 14-point underdog, when they went on the road and beat Kentucky, yeah, that does matter. You beat Vandy by more than anyone else. You held them to their fewest points that they've had all year by they hadn't scored less than 17 points in a single game this year. You held them to 7. And I tell you what the most impressive part was, and this is the thing I'm saying. Like if they're doing this, I do think this is possibly one of the most significant wins they could have had because you didn't fall into any of the letdown stuff. There was no trap. And then what good teams and elite programs do, it gets a little bit uncomfortable. You come out in the second half, you go 3 plays, 75 yards, and you go up 14-0. Vandy finally starts putting some stuff together. They come right back down the field, 10 plays, 75 yards, take 5 minutes off the clock, 14-7. That's a spot where we've seen Dowell Loggins overthink some stuff. We've seen LaNorris Sellers, maybe, it's a 3 and out or whatever in the following series. 8 plays, 75 yards, answer them again. Guys, take a step back for a second. Since the Bama game, when Bama gets that late touchdown, and I think everyone thought it was over, and South Carolina runs a 2-minute drill that ends with a 40-yard touchdown, Nick Harbor. They just keep coming at you and keep coming at you. So they go right back down the field, score 21-7. They end up forcing a turnover on downs for Vandy. Then they end up, they had a punt, force another turnover on downs. Finally, touchdown, 2 plays, 61 yards. Rocket Sanders just been incredible, the entire season, but especially on Saturday. And you go up 28-7 and it's over. That's a game that people were hoping would get interesting. Never let it come close to that. There's just so much to like about the way this team is playing right now. And I'm telling you right now, if there was a way they could get in, there's not a lot of teams in the country that want to play South Carolina. They're just not. When we come back from break, and I tell you about some of our other friends and the people that pay our bills, we're going to talk about LaNorris Sellers and some other specific things that he's done turning a corner, because I was talking about it with a few people on social media, the improvements he's made just from his pocket awareness, from his footwork, he is coming into his own. And now you're starting to hear all the chatter from actual national scouts and pundits and ESPN analysts. This dude could be scary. Not the most accurate deep ball thrower, but it was only a couple weeks ago that you would see him drop back and you could just see the wheels turning too fast. And what do you know? You have a sack, you have a fumble, you have an interception, you have something inexcusable that can happen, or just something bad that happened. That usually was the end result, especially with this offensive line. And over the last 2 weeks, his agility and elusiveness in the pocket and then still looking downfield, my God. I mean, it's not that he grew up and has become such a better player. It's that it happened like that. The light bulb just came on. All right, so we have to keep our light bulbs on, metaphorically speaking. And to do that, we're going to tell you about some of our friends and sponsors on the pod. So listen, we talked about this weekend for best bets. I think South Carolina opened up as I saw it as a 14-point favorite over Mizzou, which is insane to me, even though Drew Pine is probably going to start for Mizzou. Anyway, you can get in on all that action and more with our friends at FanDuel. And I've told you about this the last couple episodes and also at the start of the show. Couldn't get a better offer if you have not already signed up for FanDuel. Go do it today. They have everything you could possibly need to make the smartest, most accurate, most well-thought-out bets that you could possibly want to make all in one place. But also, if you're a new account and you sign up, you can get $150 in bonus bets just by placing one $5 bet and winning said $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need in one place to bet live bets in the NFL. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more, all in the same place where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com today. That's FanDuel.com today. And get $150 in bonus bets once you win your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, when we come back, we will continue talking about the Vandy win, instant overreaction. It's really, I think this is the calmest I've been. It's starting to become expected, and we love to see it. When we come back, we will talk more about LaNorris Sellers when he's growing up and what he has to do to close out the season if South Carolina wants to go 3-0. All right, Locked On Gamecocks continues next. All right, we're back. Okay, so obviously, star of the show yesterday was Rocket Sanders. I mean, he was incredible. Man, I tell you what, it took a minute. You could tell he had some lingering injuries, but he does look 100% now. There's an extra burst. It almost the way he runs reminds me of Sean Alexander, because he's a big-bodied back that doesn't have necessarily breakaway speed. It doesn't seem like, because he's so big, but he has such a smooth way of eluding you and then outrunning you, just like he forces you to take a bad angle and then he's gone. Thought that he was fantastic. Obviously, yesterday the offensive line's been really good over the past 2 weeks. A couple of pre-snap penalties need to get fixed, all that kind of stuff. But man, I tell you what, they went out there and it almost looked Vandy almost looked disinterested once they couldn't get anything going in the first half with the run game. Because if you think about it, guys, outside of like a couple of like very closely contested catches, all from Eli Sowers, I mean, outside of that was the entire offense. I wrote this down. This is how dominant South Carolina was at the start. And it was kind of funny because they took a page out of Vandy's playbook, or what Vandy's tried to do this season to teams throughout the year, which is ball control and run it down your throats. At the start of the second quarter, there's like 13 minutes left in the second quarter when I did these numbers. South Carolina had 27 total plays. Vandy had 11. Time of possession was 11:35 to 5:14. That's like Vandy's bread and butter. Total yards 148 to 26. First downs 11 to 2. That's been one of the other biggest things that Carolina has been so much better at, is converting third downs, getting yourself into manageable third downs, and then continuing drives. I mean, 11 first downs in like the first 17 minutes of game time. In that time, Sellers was 8 of 12 for 100 yards and a touchdown. Now, by halftime, so from that moment on, there's like 13:41 left in the second quarter. South Carolina only attempted 2 more passes the entire half. They just ran it down Vandy's throat. And it didn't necessarily result in a touchdown. You had some sleepy things that happened, like that seemed to always happen at Vandy. Herrera missed a field goal. You had, I think you took yourself out of a drive because of a pre-snap penalty on one, something like that. And then I'm trying to think, but then like there was times when Sellers has an inexcusable fumble inside of zone 20, which cannot happen, and he had done a much better job with that over the past several weeks. I'm like texting a buddy about him, like venting and pissed off, and like here we go, and within a half second later, Kyle Kennard forces another fumble, gets the ball right back, and South Carolina starts heading the other way with it. 6 of 8 on third downs. This is at halftime. 6 of 8 on third downs. You were outgaining them by 102 total yards. You had 187 yards. Held them to 83. And again, that's the thing. Like, it's not that you beat Vanderbilt. It's that in beating them, you held them to their fewest points. You held them to their fewest first downs. You also had the most first downs out of any team that's played them this year. And then several other I'm trying to think of it. Like, Pavia's number, like, he had a bad game against Auburn, so that was technically worse. But this game was either, statistically speaking, his and Vanderbilt's worst or second worst game of the entire year. I mean, the defense was suffocating. And it was like that all day long. Let's see here. The other thing that I've really, really have enjoyed watching over the past couple weeks, Dowell Loggins, as much as I said some regrettable things about him after the Ole Miss game, he is becoming one of the best on-script play callers in the conference. Like, I'm not going to say the country. Guys, think about this too. They've won 3 games in a row. It's not like they beat the worst teams in the SEC. It's not like they beat Florida, Mississippi State, Kentucky, and whoever else. They won 3 games in a row. 2 of them were in back-to-back weeks against ranked opponents, including a top 10 opponent. The last loss was a 2-point loss against Alabama, which they should have won. Outside, and I'm going to keep saying it, outside of that damn Ole Miss game, and now Ole Miss looks like world beaters, you're talking about a team that you could make the case that could be 8-1. Ugh. I mean, and listen, maybe the silver lining of what happened in that LSU game, or even the Ole Miss, debacle, was they finally figured out the adjustments that needed to be made, because that team has not come back out of that locker room. Not once. Let's see here. I'm just going over some more numbers. How about this? LaNorris Sellers, 14 of 20 for 238 yards. Another honestly, I mean, career best. It was a fringe career best game. Like, it was one of his best games. He's also over his last 4 games. We kept talking about how he's got to stop and fix the turnover issues. His last 4 games, he's got 8 total touchdowns, 1 interception, and he's completing 65% of his passes. I'll do a deep dive this week and kind of break down what those numbers were beforehand. Also, I thought about this the other day. I like for work, whether it was that STS or with ESPN Baton Rouge and all that, I make graphics like every single day, and I would love to make some for South Carolina, but I don't know where they would go. So if you have any ideas where I could post them, what you would want to see, let me know. All right, so these are the numbers that he had at the start of the year, right? I'm talking everything up to Ole Miss. 43.5% completion percentage, 71 against Kentucky. He was 10 of 14 though. 9 of 16 the week after, so 56%. 20 of 32 against Ole Miss, and a lot of that was in garbage time. He had only 1 game out of those 4 where he had a passing touchdown. He had 2 of them against Kentucky, and he had an interception, at least 1 interception in 3 of those 4. Fast forward to since that Alabama game and since the loss to Ole Miss, he's completing 64% of his passes. He has gone over 70% completion twice and 66.7 in the other one. He has thrown for 238 yards or more. So like the 238 yards he had against Bama, that was his career best in his first year as a starter. He's done that twice since then. So he's had a career high in yardage 3 times out of the last 4 weeks. And he's had multiple passing touchdowns in 3 of the 4. Like I said, 8 total. Like the only game he didn't have multiple passing touchdowns was Oklahoma, and that game was over. I mean, it's just really, really, really. I don't think this is like. Listen, going into the season, it felt like a lot of us just really forced and like manufactured like too much of a belief that like this was going to be great from the start. And I said this a couple weeks ago, like the Peyton Manning thing. Peyton Manning was I think he like had 20 something interceptions his first year as a starter in the NFL. Like it takes a minute for some people and some players to get it going and find their footing and all that kind of stuff. LaNorris Sellers has clearly found his. Like he's clearly found his. So you look at what's left on the schedule and the meat that's left on the bone here. You get Mizzou this weekend. And like I said, you're a 14-point favorite in that. You're not going to lose to Wofford. If you do, I'm going to quit the show. And then you get a Clemson team that's struggling. A couple weeks ago, guys, I came on here and I said, there's a path to go 9-3. There's a path to the playoff. And everyone thought it was the dumbest thing that ever heard, which is saying something because I say a lot of dumb stuff. It doesn't even seem like it's like, oh, that could happen. It feels like destined to happen at this point. Like not that they're going to get into the playoff, that they are going to finish the season undefeated. And I don't want to jinx it because that Clemson game obviously is going to be tough on the road. But what an incredible, incredible job in turnaround mid-season. And the funniest part about it, or one of the funniest parts about it too, is that when they talk to any of the players, it is the most like nonchalant, like afterthought of, we didn't have a players only meeting, a come to Jesus meeting. It was just like, yeah, I mean, we know what we're capable of. We had a couple bad games. Maybe you shouldn't have yelled about it on your podcast. Anyway, those were the big things from this weekend. Also, some just news and notes, because there were several things that happened this weekend. So it's reported from On3 that Dylan Stewart is going. They're beginning to start looking into how to not restructure, but like re-up his deal, his NIL deal. I don't know what he was getting when he like. I know his valuation was like at $350 at the start of the year. Shocker, we've got technical difficulties. So I think I just kept talking for like probably 7 minutes. I don't know where we left off, where we began. So real quick, before we end today's episode, the news broke that Dylan Stewart and the NIL collective from South Carolina are actively working to negotiate a contract so he will stay in Columbia for his second year. It kind of sounds gross because that's just the way and the nature that college football is nowadays. It's no different than the NFL in terms of like having to restructure, renegotiate contract, blah, 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 whatever. silver lining on this, or the positive side of this, because I know a lot of fans were like upset that, this is just this is what it is now in this day and age of football. But at least you didn't get caught in a situation where in a month from now, when the portal does open, one, he's already got one foot out the door because people are definitely tampering with him. Or two, he didn't say anything, as a lot of 18-year-old kids wouldn't. And then by the time the portal was open, he's got nothing but leverage to make you pay even more. I thought it was a very, very maturely handled situation, and good on South Carolina for making sure they're out ahead of whatever could potentially happen with him. Make sure he stays in Columbia. So that is going to be all for today's episode. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I hope you guys had a fantastic weekend and enjoying the third straight win for this team. Real quick, so we'll be back tomorrow morning, and we have Mizzou this weekend. Like I said, if you guys are going to the game, let me know. Might have to venture on down there now that I'm going to be in Columbia for a couple weeks. So anyway, we'll get to that some other point. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your night. Make sure when you are done listening to Locked On Gamecocks as your first listen every day, you are making sure that Locked On SEC is your second listen. Chris Gordy, very sad right now, big LSU fan. Went all the way to Baton Rouge to see that live Tiger on the field and get a terrible loss. So just, to make him feel better about life, go listen to his podcast up next. I hope you guys have a great night. Talk to you tomorrow. Love y'all. Go Cox. Spectrum sucks.